हेलो बच्चों। सीबीएसई क्लास 10th हिस्ट्री सब्जेक्ट सेक्शन 1 इवेंट्स एंड प्रोसेसेस चैप्टर 2 द नेशनलिस्ट मूवमेंट इन इंडो चाइना पार्ट 2 द डिलेमा ऑफ colonial education पेज नंबर 34 French colonization was not based only on economic exploitation. It was also driven by the idea of civilizing mission, like the British in India. The French claimed that they were bringing modern civilization to the Vietnamese. They took for granted that Europe had developed the most advanced civilization. So it became the duty of the Europeans to introduce these modern ideas to the colony, even if this meant destroying local cultures, religions, and traditions, because these were seen as outdated and prevented modern development. Education was seen as one way to civilize the native. But in order to educate them, the French had to resolve a dilemma. How far were the Vietnamese to be educated? The French needed an educated local labor force, but they feared that education might create problems. Once educated, the Vietnamese may begin to question colonial domination. Moreover, French citizens living in Vietnam, called colons, began fearing that they might lose their jobs as teachers, shopkeepers, policemen to be educated Vietnamese. So they opposed policies that would give the Vietnamese full access to French education. Talking modern. The French were faced with yet another problem in the sphere of education. The elites in Vietnam were powerfully influenced by Chinese culture. To consolidate their power, the French had to counter this Chinese influence. So they systematically dismantled the traditional educational system and established French schools for the Vietnamese. But this was not easy. Chinese, the language used by the elites so far, had to be replaced. But what was to take its place? Was the language to be Vietnamese or French? There were two broad opinions on this question. Some policymakers emphasized the need to use the French language as the medium of instruction. By learning the language, they felt the Vietnamese would be introduced to the culture and civilization of France. This would help create an Asiatic France solidly tied to European France. The educated people in Vietnam would respect French sentiments and ideals, see the superiority of French culture, and work for the French. Others were opposed to French being the only medium of instruction. They suggested that Vietnamese be taught in lower classes and French in the higher classes. The few who learnt French and acquired French culture were to be rewarded with French citizenship. However, only the Vietnamese elite, comprising a small fraction of the population, could enroll in the schools, and only a few among those admitted ultimately passed the school leaving examination. This was largely because of the deliberate policy of failing students, particularly in the final year, so that they could not qualify for the better paid jobs. Usually, as many as two-thirds of the students failed. In 1925, in a population of 17 million, there were less than 400 who passed the examination. School textbooks glorified the French and justified colonial rule. The Vietnamese were represented as primitive and backward, capable of manual labor but not of intellectual reflection. They could work in the fields but not rule themselves. They were skilled copyists but not creative. School children were told that only French rule could ensure peace in Vietnam. Since the establishment of French rule, the Vietnamese peasants no longer lives in the constant terror of pirates. Calm is complete and the peasant can work with a good heart. Looking modern. The Tonkin Free School was started in 1907 to provide a Western style education. This education included classes in science, hygiene, and French. These classes were held in the evening and had to be paid for separately. The school's approach to what it means to be modern is a good example of the thinking prevalent at that time. It was not enough to learn science and Western ideas. To be modern, the Vietnamese had to also look modern. The school encouraged the adoption of Western styles such as having a short haircut. For the Vietnamese, this meant a major break with their own identity, since they traditionally kept long hair. To underline the importance of a total change, there was even a hair cutting chant. Comb in the left hand, scissors in the right. Snip, snip, clip, clip. Watch out, be careful. Drop stupid practices, dumb childish things. Speak openly and frankly. Study Western customs. Resistance in schools. Teachers and students did not blindly follow the curriculum. Sometimes there was open opposition, at other times there was silent resistance. As the numbers of Vietnamese teachers increased in the lower classes, it became difficult to control what was actually taught. While teaching, Vietnamese teachers quietly modified the text and criticized what was stated. In 1926, a major protest erupted in the Saigon Native Girls' School. A Vietnamese girl sitting in one of the front seats was asked to move to the back of the class and allow a local French student to occupy the front bench. She refused. The principal, also a colon, French people in the colonies, expelled her. When angry students protested, they too were expelled, leading to a further spread of open protests. Seeing the situation getting out of control, the government forced the school to take the students back. The principal reluctantly agreed but warned the students, I will crush all Vietnamese under my feet. Ah, you wish my deportation. Know well that I will leave only after I am assured Vietnamese no longer inhabit Cochin, China. Elsewhere, students fought against the colonial government's efforts to prevent the Vietnamese from qualifying for white collar jobs. They were inspired by patriotic feelings and the conviction that it was the duty of the educated to fight for the benefit of society. This brought them into conflict with the French as well as the traditional elite, since both saw their position threatened. By the 1920s, students were forming various political parties, such as the Party of Young Annan, and publishing nationalist journals such as the Annanese Student. Schools thus became an important place for political and cultural battles. The French sought to strengthen their rule in Vietnam through the control of education. They tried to change the values, norms, and perceptions of the people to make them believe in the superiority of French civilization and the inferiority of the Vietnamese. Vietnamese intellectuals, on the other hand, feared that Vietnam was losing not just control over its territory but its very identity. Its own culture and customs were being devalued, and the people were developing a master slave mentality. The battle against French colonial education became part of the larger 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 battle against colonialism and for independence. Thank you. See you in the next video. Thank you.